The 1960s were a time when Christian families operated under a financial code rooted in Scripture and passed down through generations. These families lived debt-free not by accident, but by conviction. They followed principles that banks could never profit from and that credit card companies would spend decades trying to destroy. Here are the reasons why Christian families had no debt in the 1960s and why those secrets still matter today. Paying cash for everything, including major purchases, was the foundation of financial life for Christian families in the 1960s. Scripture was clear on the matter. Proverbs taught that the borrower is slave to the lender, and these families took that warning literally. Credit cards were rare and largely unavailable anyway, but even when offered, most Christian families refused them on principle. The philosophy was simple and unshakable. If you did not have the money in your hand, you did not buy the item. Fathers would save for months, sometimes years, to pay cash for a used car or a new refrigerator. Mothers kept money hidden in coffee cans and kitchen drawers known only to them. The act of counting out bills and handing them over represented independence and obedience to God. Nobody owned you when you paid cash. There was no interest eating away at your paycheck, no collectors calling your home, and no anxiety about making payments. For Christian families navigating a world full of temptation, paying cash meant spiritual freedom. It meant that everything you had was given by God and truly yours. The envelope budgeting system was how Christian mothers managed household finances with precision and prayerful discipline. Every payday, cash was divided into labeled envelopes for rent, groceries, utilities, church tithes, and savings. The tithe envelope was always filled first, as an act of faith. Once an envelope was empty, spending in that category stopped until the next payday. No exceptions and no excuses. Children learned early that when Mama said the grocery envelope was low, you ate what was in the house and made it stretch. There was no borrowing from the rent envelope to cover extras. This system required planning, sacrifice, and honest assessment of what the family could truly afford. Mothers passed this method down to their daughters, teaching them that knowing exactly where every dollar went was the only way to honor God with your finances. The envelopes were often worn and reused month after month, each crease telling the story of careful stewardship. For Christian families, those kitchen drawer envelopes represented more than organization. They represented faithful management of what the Lord had provided. The shame and stigma around owing anyone money ran deep in Christian communities in the 1960s. Debt was not seen as a tool or a convenience. It was viewed as a spiritual failing and as a sign that you could not manage what God had entrusted to you. Families whispered about neighbors who owed money to the corner store or who had their furniture repossessed. Children were taught that their testimony was everything. Nothing destroyed a Christian witness faster than being known as someone who did not pay their debts. Pastors preached that when you owed money, you were not free. You belonged to whoever held that debt, and that was a form of bondage that Scripture warned against. This mindset was reinforced every Sunday when sermons touched on stewardship and on living within your means. For Christian families who believed they were called to be lights in the world, the idea of voluntarily putting yourself in debt felt like compromise. Being debt-free was not just smart, it was righteous. Layaway plans at department stores were how Christian families acquired expensive items without borrowing or going into debt during the 1960s. Layaway allowed shoppers to put items on hold, make small payments over weeks or months, and take the item home only once it was fully paid. This meant no interest, no credit checks, and no risk of owing money you could not repay. Mothers would start layaway on winter coats in summer, paying a few dollars each week until cold weather arrived. Christmas gifts went on layaway in September, ensuring children would have something under the tree without the family going into debt. The discipline required to visit the store weekly, make payments, and wait patiently until the item was yours taught lessons that credit cards would later erase entirely. For Christian families, layaway was patience made practical. It was delayed gratification with a receipt. Joining Christmas clubs at local banks and church credit unions was a tradition that helped Christian families save for the holidays without stress or borrowing. These special accounts let members deposit small amounts weekly throughout the year, then receive the full sum in November or December. The money was earmarked for Christmas gifts and holiday meals. Nothing else. Walking into the bank every Friday to make that deposit became a family ritual. Children accompanied their parents, learning the habit of consistent, faithful saving. By the time December arrived, families had accumulated enough to celebrate the birth of Christ without borrowing a dime. Some credit unions paid small bonuses on these accounts, making the practice even more rewarding. Christmas clubs removed the temptation to spend holiday money early. Withdrawing before the designated date meant forfeiting everything. For Christian families, this system meant January arrived without crushing debt. The new year began clean and free. Waiting for sales and never paying full price was a point of pride for Christian families managing tight budgets in the 1960s. Mothers studied newspaper circulars like Scripture, memorizing deals and planning shopping trips around the best prices. They knew which stores marked down produce on certain days and when department stores ran clearance events. Buying anything at full price was considered poor stewardship. Children learned to wait for what they wanted, understanding that patience could mean getting the same item for half the cost. School clothes were purchased at end-of-season sales, sized up to allow for growth. Canned goods were stocked during loss leader promotions. The philosophy extended beyond groceries to furniture and appliances. This discipline was not about being cheap. It was about maximizing every dollar God had provided and refusing to let retailers take more than necessary. Making items last through constant repairs and maintenance was how Christian families avoided unnecessary purchases in the 1960s. Nothing was thrown away simply because it was worn or broken. Fathers spent weekend hours fixing appliances, patching roofs, and keeping old cars running with determination and skill. Mothers mended clothes, resoled shoes with cardboard, and found ways to extend the life of household items others might discard. Children learned that taking care of your possessions was both practical and honoring to God, who had provided them. A washing machine might last 20 years because someone knew how to replace belts and unclog hoses. Furniture was reupholstered rather than replaced. The television repairman was called long before anyone considered buying a new set. This mindset came from generations of making do with less and refusing to let anything go to waste. For Christian families, maintenance was not just about saving money. It was about respecting what God had entrusted to their care. The hand-me-down culture among older siblings and cousins kept Christian families clothed without constant spending. Clothes were passed down systematically, traveling through multiple children before being retired. Older cousins sometimes sent boxes of outgrown clothes across state lines to younger relatives who needed them. Nothing wearable was thrown away. This practice was never seen as settling for less. It was practical, sensible, and an expression of family love. Children learned to take care of their clothes because they knew younger siblings would need them next. Mothers altered hems, took in waists, and patched knees to extend the life of each piece. Hand-me-downs stretched clothing budgets further than seemed possible, freeing money for necessities like rent and tithes. The practice strengthened family bonds, as garments carried memories across households. For Christian families, wearing hand-me-downs was evidence of a support system built on love and shared sacrifice. Relying on church benevolence funds and emergency collections kept Christian families afloat during the 1960s. Churches were more than houses of worship. They were financial safety nets for their members. Congregations maintained emergency funds to help families facing unexpected hardships, like medical bills, funeral costs, or job losses. Deacons visited families in need, bringing groceries and sometimes cash collected from Sunday offerings. Members gave what they could and received help when they needed it, creating a cycle of generosity that required no paperwork and charged no interest. Church mothers organized food drives and clothing exchanges. The pastor knew which families were struggling and quietly directed resources their way. This system of mutual aid meant Christian families rarely had to turn to predatory lenders or go into debt during emergencies, keeping them debt-free. The church community functioned as a safety net, built on faith, love, and the understanding that everyone would need help eventually. Tithing faithfully taught Christian families financial discipline that protected them from debt. Giving 10% of income to the church before paying any other bill seemed counterintuitive, but it worked. The practice forced families to budget carefully from the start, knowing that portion was already spoken for. Tithing also connected families to church resources and community support that would be there when hard times came. Children watched their parents place envelopes in the offering plate every Sunday, learning that generosity and financial health went together. For families who tithed faithfully, there was always enough. Maybe not abundance, but enough. The discipline of giving first created habits of restraint and planning that carried into every other financial decision. Borrowing from family instead of banks or finance companies kept Christian families debt-free in the 1960s. When someone needed money for an emergency or a down payment, they turned first to relatives. A brother might loan money for car repairs, expecting repayment when possible, but charging no interest. An aunt might help with the first month's rent when a young couple was starting out. These loans came with no credit checks, no paperwork, and no penalties for late payment. The only collateral was family honor and the understanding that you would do the same when called upon. Borrowing from family meant keeping money within the community rather than paying interest to outside institutions. Repayment happened slowly, sometimes a little at a time, without destroying relationships. For Christian families who faced skepticism from banks, borrowing from kin was both practical and dignified. Living in multi-generational homes, where grandparents, parents, and children shared expenses, was common for Christian families in the 1960s. 3 generations under one roof meant splitting costs that would otherwise strain a single household. Grandparents contributed Social Security or pension checks, while parents provided primary income. Older children who worked handed over portions of their paychecks for room and board. Rent, utilities, and groceries were divided, reducing the burden on everyone. Beyond splitting bills, these homes provided built-in childcare, eliminating daycare costs entirely. Grandmothers watched children while parents worked. The arrangement was practical, not shameful. Families pooled resources intentionally, understanding that collective strength was better than individual struggle. When someone faced job loss or illness, others picked up the slack without anyone going into debt. Bartering services with neighbors and fellow church members allowed Christian families to get what they needed without spending cash in the 1960s. A neighbor who could fix cars might trade skills for another neighbor's sewing. The man who cut hair might receive fresh vegetables from the family with a garden. These exchanges happened naturally, built on relationships and trust that money could never buy. Bartering kept cash in pockets for necessities like rent and tithes, while still meeting everyday needs. Children grew up understanding that skills had value, even when money was tight. A woman who could braid hair, alter clothes, or bake cakes traded those talents within her community. The practice required knowing your neighbors well enough to understand what they needed and what they could offer. For Christian families, bartering was economically wise and community building, creating bonds that lasted generations. Building strong marriages that functioned as financial partnerships was central to how Christian families stayed debt-free in the 1960s. Husbands and wives operated as one unit, making major decisions together and holding each other accountable before God. There was no his money or her money. It was all family money, directed towards shared goals and kingdom purposes. Couples discussed finances openly, something many modern marriages avoid entirely. When one spouse wanted to make a purchase, the other had to agree. This prevented impulsive spending and kept both partners focused on stewardship rather than accumulation. Divorce was less common, meaning family wealth stayed intact rather than being divided and depleted. The stability of covenant marriage provided a foundation for long-term planning that debt would have disrupted. Children watched their parents work together, learning that financial success required unity, sacrifice, and shared faith. For Christian families, strong marriage was not just about love, it was about building something that would last for generations and protect against the vulnerability debt creates. Facing community accountability for spending habits kept Christian families financially disciplined in the 1960s. Everyone knew everyone in tight-knit church communities, and word traveled fast about who was living beyond their means. If someone bought a flashy car they clearly could not afford, fellow members noticed. If a family was seen spending carelessly while owing money to others, their reputation suffered and their witness was damaged. This social pressure was powerful. Nobody wanted to be known as the family that could not manage what God had provided. Church members, neighbors, and extended family served as informal accountability partners who noticed when spending seemed out of line. Children were taught that how you handled money reflected on your whole family and on your faith. The community functioned as a mirror, reflecting the consequences of financial choices. For Christian families, knowing others were watching created an incentive to save, spend wisely, and avoid the shame of debt. Following grandmother's biblical wisdom about saving before spending shaped how Christian families managed money in the 1960s. Grandmothers carried knowledge from generations of faithful living, and their financial lessons were treated as sacred. Never spend more than you make. Always put something aside before you touch your paycheck. If you cannot pay cash, you cannot afford it. The borrower is slave to the lender, so never be a borrower. These rules were repeated at kitchen tables, during family devotions, and whenever young people needed guidance. Grandmothers had lived through depression and hardship when there was no safety net. They taught their children and grandchildren to save first, always without exception. The savings envelope was filled before groceries were bought. The emergency fund was built before new clothes were considered. These were not suggestions. They were commandments passed down from women who knew what happened when you ignored them. Practicing the patience that credit cards would later destroy was what kept Christian families debt-free in the 1960s. When you wanted something, you saved for it, and you prayed about whether you truly needed it. There was no instant gratification. No swiping a card to have it now and worry about payment later. Children learned to wait for birthday gifts, Christmas presents, and school clothes. Adults saved for months to buy furniture or appliances. The waiting was not punishment, it was discipline that made the eventual purchase meaningful and guilt-free. You appreciated what you had because you remembered how long it took to save for it. Credit cards changed everything by eliminating the wait, and with it, the discipline that waiting required. The patience practiced by Christian families in the 1960s was a spiritual skill and a protection against bondage. That patience has been largely lost to generations raised on instant credit and immediate gratification. Carrying the lost wisdom of true financial independence was what made Christian families in the 1960s different from those who came after. They understood that real freedom means owing nothing to anyone except the debt of love Scripture commands. Every paycheck was theirs to keep, not promised to creditors. Every possession was fully owned, not collateral for debt. The anxiety of monthly payments and compounding interest was absent from their lives. This wisdom required sacrifice and discipline, but the reward was peace that debt makes impossible. Grandmothers who lived by these principles are passing away, taking their knowledge with them. The systems they built and habits they taught are fading from memory. For Christian families who want to reclaim that freedom, the path remains clear in Scripture and in the example of those who walked it faithfully. Which of these financial principles resonated most with you?